Now on Overnights,
I believe in reason and common sense.
Leith Van Onselen from Macro Business with the Treasury of Common Sense.
Common sense never goes out of style.
Let's talk to Leith Van Onselen from the MB Fund, MB Super. G'day, Leith.
G'day, Clinton. How are you?
I'm good, mate. I'm good because my Optus is finally restored. Goodness me.
Oh, what a disaster.
We've been talking about it on the show today, but it's just stunning. It shows you how reliant you become on telecommunications in this day and age. And I know you with the website, very much reliant on telecommunications.
That's right, mate, but I was very lucky because I'm with Telstra at home, luckily. I didn't get hit. You're certainly right. What it does show also is that it makes you wonder if Australia's exposed to cyber, warfare, that sort of thing. I mean, how easy would it be to take down all that critical infrastructure?
Well, given
based on that.
And given the cyber attack, and this actually came to light late during our show yesterday. It was about 4:30 in the morning. I started getting a few messages, and I had a look at and I'm on Optus, right? So I had a look at my phone, and it said, "Yep, no service." And my immediate thought was the cyber attack from last year with Optus, and it probably is a demonstration to those who maybe do want to target us in that way that we are very vulnerable.
That's right, mate. It is very worrying, especially as we go into this digital age. Everything's with an app, everything's got an internet connection, et cetera, et cetera. So, it's the same whether you got solar energy at your house. The inverters and everything that run the solar energy actually need an internet connection. So it does make us very exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, big decision from the RBA this week. The interest rate increase, the 13th increase, and all the big banks. Commonwealth's yet to announce their position, but NAB, Westpac, and ANZ have already passed those rates on. What's your view?
Yeah, look, I think it was probably the right decision, unfortunately, based on the data. So basically, the Reserve Bank released its minutes last month that said that it was very concerned about the rapid growth in rents and also the rebound in house prices. Both of those have obviously been driven by the record immigration we've got at the moment. And since they released those minutes, inflation, retail sales, housing finance, they all came in stronger than expected. And the interesting thing about it is, with regards to retail sales, for example, what it showed is that the RBA's rate hikes are curbing individual household expenditure. Retail sales, once you adjust for population growth, have actually fallen. But because we're adding so many households to the economy through this immigration surge we're having, the overall demand in the economy continues to grow, even though individuals, households, and us as individuals are cutting back. And that's because, we added nearly 630,000 people to Australia last financial year, and these are levels we've never seen before. So we've effectively got this burnout economy where the RBA is trying to obviously slow the economy through rate hikes, and it's kind of having some success, at least on a per-person basis. But the federal government's basically got its foot planted on the accelerator by pumping in as many people as it can in, record numbers of people into Australia, and that's driving up demand across the economy. And we're seeing it most notably, obviously, in the rental market where, rents are rising at, an extreme pace. And we've got record, low rental vacancy rates, et cetera, and rents are actually one of the biggest drivers of inflation. So, unfortunately, as long as the federal government keeps running this extreme immigration program, the RBA is going to try and fight it by lifting interest rates.
I'll ask you.
So it's sort of this tug of war.
Yeah, I'll ask you about what you wrote about on Macro Business in regards to student immigration as well and student visas. But just before that, given, and Anthony Albanese said there were a lot of external factors, overseas factors behind the inflation figures, given that petrol and power prices are key drivers of costs, is increasing the interest rate for those that have mortgages, and obviously it flows through the economy, is that going to be effective when petrol prices are so much determined by what happens overseas and power prices are determined a lot by the transition?
Yeah, look, interest rates are a pretty bad tool to manage inflation, but unfortunately the RBA's only got one tool, and that's interest rates. So the problem with it is when you lift interest rates, you only really affect 1/3 of households. So there's basically 1/3 of households in Australia have mortgages, 1/3 rent, and 1/3 don't rent, and they don't have mortgages because they own their homes outright, and they tend to be older, like baby boomers, etc. So what you're effectively doing is you're smashing 1/3 of the economy to try and get inflation down. And what it really needs is the federal government to step up to the plate and do what it can do to slow inflation. And so really the federal government needs to pull the levers it can. It's got way more levers than the central bank. One of the biggest levers is not to run against the central bank by running this absolutely gigantic record immigration program. And even on power prices, Australia's power costs are really self-inflicted, and it's basically primarily caused by the fact that we haven't reserved any gas on the East Coast. We export 80% of overseas. So we've created, we are the Saudi Arabia of gas. Yet we're the world's biggest exporter, but we've created this artificial scarcity because we've allowed a small group of, we call them the gas cartel, take control of the gas suppliers and then to export 80% overseas while they fleece us at home. And we're the only exporter in the world that doesn't reserve gas. We do it on the West Coast. So Western Australia reserves their gas, and we've got very cheap gas and electricity prices. But us on the East Coast, we don't reserve our gas. We're the only place in the world not to do it who exports. And as a result, we've created this really high gas and electricity price spike, which is pushing up inflation. So again, that's the self-inflicted wound as well.
Yeah, well, governments can do something about that, can't they?
Absolutely.
Now, you wrote... Yeah. You wrote, and the Prime Minister's obviously been in China the last few days. He's now in the Cook Islands. But you wrote on Macro Business about this decision and this agreement he's made with the Chinese to dramatically boost Chinese visas for students. And I guess the university sector is probably celebrating that. Can we handle that? Do we need that? Is it good for us?
Well, no, it's a bit ridiculous because, obviously, just touched upon it, we've got this record immigration at the moment, and that's actually been driven, the number one driver of that's actually the student visas. So Australia, it's pretty hard to believe, we've got 665,000 student visas on issue currently in Australia, and that's up by 110,000 from the pre-pandemic peak. So, we have ramped student visas up to levels we've never seen before. And they've actually increased by over 300,000 in the last year. And that's what's effectively driven most of this immigration surge. And on top of that, we've also got 190,000 graduate visas on issue. So that's basically when a student finishes their studies, they can stay in Australia for years and work as well. So at the moment, if you take both of those together, we've got about 860,000 people in Australia right now in a country of 26 million that are either on a student visa or on a graduate visa, which means that 1 in 30 people in Australia right now is on one of those two visas. Now, it is absolutely nuts. And the Albanese government already this year signed 2 agreements with basically open borders immigration deals with India that effectively is going to ramp up Indian migration massively. So as part of that, they signed a mutual recognition agreement, which basically means that any Indian qualification now is counted as an Australian qualification. So we're talking about, secondary schooling, vocational education, universities. So if you study any of those courses over there, you can now come to Australia and use those certificates. And that's a worry because India's known for having a lot of bogus degrees, ghost colleges, etc. And to make matters worse, they also signed another agreement which basically gives 5-year student visas to Indians as well as 8-year post-study work visas automatically with no caps on numbers. And then just last week, Albanese went to China and he signed a similar deal with China. Not quite as generous, but also basically tried to open the immigration pathway to Chinese, especially Chinese students. So we've effectively got, 2 countries with populations of 2.7 billion people where Albanese has just signed these migration deals with to basically make it easier for them to come over here to live, work and study, which basically means that immigration is going to stay at high levels forever based on this. And it's a particular concern with India because India's unemployment rate is 10.1% versus Australia's, which is 3.6%. So their unemployment rate's almost 3 times ours. Their youth unemployment rate's over 20%. And India's a nation of 1.4 billion people where 2/3 of its population are aged under 30. So there's this ginormous underclass of young people in India who are going to be chomping at the bit to come to Australia, which basically means we could get unbelievably huge immigration volumes over the next few years. At the same time as we've got a housing crisis we've never seen before. And obviously shortages of infrastructure and everything else. And probably in a few years, we're going to have shortages of water if we have a El Nino. This has all been done this year by the Albanese government without any consultation with the public. And it's a bit of a worry, in my opinion.
But do we need those students, though? Yes, I mean, the universities love them because their businesses are based on that these days. But wherever you go, every single business is looking for staff, whether it's bus drivers, waiters in restaurants, shop assistants in retail. Students fill a lot of those positions, don't they?
Yeah, they do, but I mean, students also create demand as well. So, the whole notion that you can just bring in people to solve skills shortages doesn't work, and it hasn't worked because literally 21 years ago, the Howard government Howard government did an inquiry into skills shortages, and all the same people, all the business lobbies, etc., said we've got a huge skills shortage. We need immigration to solve it. Well, guess what? Australia's population has grown by 7.5 million people since then, mostly through immigration, and we've got worse skills shortages than ever. So all it tells you is that it doesn't work. It doesn't work for a variety of reasons because a lot of the people who get over here aren't actually skilled. There's massive mismatches. So effectively, we all hear the stories of people who come over as engineers and end up working as Uber drivers. And the whole thing is, it's sort of whack-a-mole. So, for example, you could say, okay, we're going to bring in 1 million builders to solve the housing crisis, right? To build a lot of homes for migrants, which is kind of, dog chasing its tail anyway. But then if you do that, you're going to create shortages in hospitals and everything else because those 1 million people, those 1 million builders you bring in are going to need hospital care, they're going to need schooling. So then your solution is, okay, we need to bring in some migrants to fill hospitals, to nurses, all those sorts of things. We need to bring in migrants to be school teachers to fill those shortages. And then you end up back to square one where suddenly you have another shortage of homes because you've brought in a whole bunch of migrants to solve the previous problem. And you basically play whack-a-mole where you've solved one shortage and then you create another.
Yeah.
And it's a never-ending circular
vicious cycle.
And we've had it for 20 years. Like we've literally, this century, Australia's population has grown by 7.5 million people through immigration. And guess what? We've got worse skills shortages than ever. And all it tells you is keep continually ramping up immigration. We've had extremely high immigration in the last 20 years. It hasn't solved the problem because it's just created other problems. And, and we're all living it. Well, we're seeing it most acutely in the housing market at the moment where we've got literally people becoming homeless, having to live in cars, having to live in group housing, having to pay exorbitant rents to try and put a roof over their head. It's just self-defeating.
But as you've written on your website, the opposition is supporting this, aren't they?
Yeah, unfortunately, now this is the most disappointing thing. There was some noises that the coalition, might oppose this record immigration we've got, but then opposition leader Peter Dutton went to an Indian university last week where he gave a speech where he basically said that he wholeheartedly, wholeheartedly agrees with Labor that we need to basically boost Indian migration to Australia, and that he fully supports the migration pacts that the Albanese government has signed this year. So it's a bipartisan deal. To use his exact quote he said, quote, "There is a strong bipartisan support between the two major political parties in Australia when it comes to nurturing migration with India." That's what he said. So effectively, Australians don't support this mass immigration. We never have. Every opinion poll will tell you that, held before the pandemic, during the pandemic, they said we didn't want to return to pre-COVID levels of immigration. And guess what? The Albanese government's ramped to double that level. The levels were never seen for about 500,000 last financial year. And the opposition leaders just gone to India and said, this is great, we want more of it. So effectively, we're just caught with these two, the two major political parties, and also the Greens, to be quite frank, all support this ginormous mass immigration that the populace doesn't support. And they've never taken it to election. In fact, before the previous election, Anthony Albanese was giving signals that Labor was going to run a lower immigration program. He said that in January last year. He came out and said that. And then as soon as he was elected, he's ramped it up to levels we've never seen before. So, it's all very undemocratic. And, forget the voice, mate. We need we need a referendum or a plebiscite on population growth. Like, Australians should be asked, how big do you want this nation to become?
Yeah, and I don't think they want it big. I don't. All the feedback I get on this radio program week after week is they don't want it big. And, my concern is how big our cities are getting. We seem to just be piling everyone into Sydney and Melbourne.
100%. And that's, that's the whole thing. It's just the reason why people don't support it. It's, you put away the whole racist dog whistle and all this sort of stuff, which detractors always like to say. It's not about that. It's about living standards. So, if you lived in Sydney or Melbourne, you've seen your cities become, the quality of life in the past 20 years has degraded quite significantly. You've got traffic congestion everywhere. Now you have to pay tolls when you want to go anywhere. Previously, you didn't have to. And obviously now, when I was growing up as a kid, just about all of us were were raised in houses with backyards. Now families are being raised in apartments and high-rise apartments without backyards. So that there is a degradation of the quality of life. And it's just going to get worse.
And the New South Wales Premier, Chris Minns, he's made it very clear he doesn't want more urban sprawl. He wants to go up. He's made it really, really clear that the New South Wales government will start in the future overriding local councils if they don't support his measures to start infill, going up more density, which means that the backyard will be dead.
Yeah, 100%. Well, actually, urban task force projections. So that's a big developer lobby. They did projections in 2016 for Sydney, and they said that basically by 2056 was their projection back then. They said that Sydney would go from, in 2016, 56% of homes were detached housing, and there was about 25% apartments. By 2056, it would completely flip around, and you'd have 25% detached housing and 50% apartments and 25% townhouses. So effectively, that was their projections back in 2016. So effectively, Sydney would become a place mid-century where only the rich can afford a house, like a detached house. Everyone else would be pretty much living in apartments.
We are heading rapidly.
And is that a future we really want for our kids and grandkids? I sure as hell don't want it for my kids. But we're already going down that direction. It's great for high-rise Harry. He makes a mint. He's loving it. Billionaire, whatever. He lives in Point Piper while everyone else lives in his apartments. But it's not so great if you're, just a, ordinary rank and file Australian or future Australian who wants to have the Australian quality of life. It just means the famed Australian quality of life is going to die. And that's all because of this, massive population growth. Sydney and Melbourne, mid-century, are supposed to get to around 9 million to 10 million people each. Do we really want that? I mean, at the turn of the century, Melbourne was 3.3 million. Sydney was 3.8 million, around about the time of the Sydney Olympics. And I'd argue there was a much more livable place then than it is now, and it's going to get a lot worse if it nearly doubles in size again, which is the projection.
And our infrastructure can't cope with the way it is at the moment. Now, our state governments who, in the end, supply the infrastructure, the hospitals, the roads, they can't afford to support the cities we have of this size at the moment anyway. It's good to talk to you, Leith. We can read all about it on the website Macro Business. We'll catch up next week.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Anytime, mate.